There's a moment, and I've seen it happen exactly once in my life, where the universe holds its breath. Not metaphorically, not the way people say it at weddings or funerals when they want to sound poetic. I mean literally, like everything in the room stopped drawing oxygen at the same time. I was there, I saw it, and I still wake up some nights with the sound of it ringing in my ears, that low, chest-crushing vibration that came out of Marcus Vale right before the entire eastern wing of the Sovereignty Spire went dark. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started, which was not with thunder or fire or the kind of dramatic nonsense you see in holodramas. It started with a mop. A gray, half-frayed mop in the hands of a man nobody in that building thought was worth remembering. My name is Sira Dren. I work courier logistics for the Interstellar Commerce Bureau, 9th floor, Eastern Corridor, nothing glamorous. I carry data chips and physical documents between departments because certain classified materials can't be transmitted digitally. Old-fashioned, I know. But the ICB is old-fashioned in a lot of ways, which is actually the reason I was still in the building at 2200 hours that night instead of already halfway home. Document backlog, don't ask. The Sovereignty Spire sits at the geographic center of New Meridian, which is itself the administrative capital of the Galactic Compact's human-managed sector. 53 floors, all glass and pale alloy, with those tall, narrow windows that glow amber at night and make the whole building look like a lantern from the street below. It's an impressive place. The kind of building designed to make you feel small without ever being rude about it. The Compact had been using it for joint sessions and diplomatic meetings ever since the Accord of Three Suns restructured human governance 6 years ago. What that meant, practically speaking, was that the upper floors, 38 through 53, were frequently occupied by non-human dignitaries, delegations, and administrative staff from various species. Most of them were fine, bored, a little aloof, sometimes impatient the way powerful people everywhere tend to be, but fine. And then there was the Verk sovereignty. If you've never heard of the Verk, consider yourself fortunate in the specific way that people are fortunate when they've never been bitten by something venomous. You haven't missed beauty, you've missed pain. The Verk are tall, 2.5 meters, most of them, with that blue-gray skin that catches light in ways human skin doesn't, bioluminescent traces running along the temples and the backs of the hands, eyes that are large and gold, and carry exactly the kind of weight that comes from a species that's been at the top of the galactic food chain for 400 years. They move slowly when they want you to notice them and quickly when they want to terrify you, and they have perfected, and I mean perfected down to an art form, the look of absolute, serene contempt. Their Empress was visiting the Spire for what was officially described as a diplomatic courtesy engagement. In real language, it meant she was here to remind everyone in the building that her sovereignty controlled 17 star systems and 3 major trade corridors, and that human-managed space was, in her considered opinion, a temporary administrative arrangement. Her name was Empress Vale Sarath Kine. She had arrived 2 days prior with a retinue of 47 personal guards in that black and silver armor that made them look carved rather than clothed, 2 senior advisors who spoke for her in formal settings, a handful of attendants, and various diplomatic aides whose job seemed primarily to be standing near her and looking appropriately serious. I'd seen her once in passing on the 39th floor, just a glimpse through a hallway. Even at distance, she had that quality, like gravity, like you were slightly tilted in her direction without meaning to be. I hadn't thought much about her after that. I was thinking about my document backlog. So, 2200 hours. The building was mostly empty security staff, a few late-working administrators on the lower floors, the Verk delegation on 39, and me, hauling a sealed case of materials up to 37 for morning delivery so I wouldn't have to deal with the morning rush. The service elevator on my side was out for maintenance, which meant I had to cut through the central atrium on 38 to reach the secondary lift bank. The central atrium on 38 is one of the building's showcase spaces. High ceiling, recessed lighting, a long curved reception desk along the left wall, seating areas in pale gray and silver decorative panels along the back showing rotating displays of various star systems in the compact. Very intentional, very designed to impress. At 2200 hours, it should have been empty. It wasn't. I heard it before I saw it. The doors from the secure corridor slid open and the sound hit me, not loud, but layered. Multiple voices, that particular musical cadence of the Verk language, the soft percussion of heavy boots on polished floor. I stopped instinctively, pressed myself sideways toward the wall, not hiding exactly but not exactly announcing myself either. The Verk made me nervous in the specific way that large, powerful things make small, careful people nervous, not because I expected to be targeted, but because being in their path felt like standing near heavy machinery, even when it wasn't aimed at you. The Empress was there. All 47 of her retinue weren't. This looked like a late evening walkthrough, maybe an informal tour of the facility she'd requested, maybe just restlessness. 6 guards, 2 advisors, 3 attendants, casual by her standards. She was moving slowly through the atrium, pausing to look at things with that particular quality of attention that royalty develops. The ability to indicate interest without indicating too much interest, to examine something without suggesting it could possibly surprise her. One of her advisors was talking. I don't speak Verk, few humans do, it's tonal in 7 registers and our hearing doesn't naturally catch 2 of them, but the tone was explanatory. Describing the space, probably. The history of the building, something like that. And then one of the attendants said something, and there was a murmur of low Verk laughter from the group, and I followed their collective gaze to the far end of the atrium. That's when I saw him. He was mopping. That's the whole image. Just a man, average height, maybe late 40s, in the standard gray-green maintenance uniform of the Spire's facilities crew. He had a rolling bucket, one of the old-fashioned ones with the ringer mechanism, and a standard industrial mop, and he was working his way slowly across the far end of the atrium floor in long, even strokes. He hadn't noticed the group come in, or if he hadn't changed what he was doing. He just kept moving. Back, forward, methodical, steady. There was something about the way he moved. I noticed it in that first instant before I had language for it, a quality of precision that felt out of place. Not rushed, not slow, just exact. Every stroke covered the same width, the same pressure, the same arc. Like a machine almost, except machines don't have that quality of presence. This man had presence. The quiet, dense kind, the kind you feel before you identify it. He was older than I'd first thought. The maintenance work lights caught his face when he turned late 50s, maybe, with that particular kind of weathered skin that comes from sun exposure rather than age, thick gray at the temples, jaw that had been broken at least once and healed slightly wrong. His hands on the mop handle were large, scarred. The knuckles had a texture to them that I associated with, and I'm not being dramatic, this is just what it looked like: impact damage. Repeated, long-term impact damage. But what I noticed most was this: his eyes. He glanced once toward the Verk group as they entered. Just once, a brief, flat assessment, the way you look at something you've already classified and don't need to re-examine. And then he went back to mopping. No nervousness, no deference, no performance of smallness. Just assessment, classification, return to task. I have been in the presence of frightened people my entire career, working in bureaucratic buildings where everyone is always at least slightly afraid of something. Afraid of their supervisor, afraid of their quarterly review, afraid of the diplomat on 40 who complains about everything. I know what it looks like when someone is managing fear. This man was not managing anything. He simply was not afraid. The Empress noticed him about 30 seconds after I did. She had been examining one of the star system display panels, holding her position in front of it, saying something to her advisor when something in her peripheral vision must have caught her attention. She turned slowly, looked at him with those large gold eyes, and held very still for a moment. I don't know if she was surprised. The Verk don't read easily, and Empress Sareth kind less than most. But there was something in the quality of her stillness that felt like recalibration. Then she spoke. I didn't understand the words. But one of the human translators, there was a single human diplomatic aide in the group, a young man named Toreth who worked for the Bureau of Compact Relations. I recognized him vaguely, went slightly pale. The Empress spoke again, more slowly, with a tone that was clearly meant to carry. Toreth cleared his throat. The man with the mop kept mopping. Toreth moved forward slightly toward the man. "Excuse me," he said in standard. His voice was professionally even, but the pale had not left his face. The Empress Sareth Kine of the Verk sovereignty, She is addressing you." The man with the mop stopped, looked up, looked at Torith, then at the Empress, not with alarm, with that same flat, complete attention. "I heard," he said. His voice was low, rougher than I expected, like something that had been used in ways that voices aren't usually used, shouting through wind, maybe, or in spaces with bad acoustics. Torith looked faintly relieved that the man had spoken at all. "She says," he hesitated, chose his words with visible care. "She says she is surprised that the human administrators still use biological labor for maintenance tasks. She says that your species' attachment to manual work is one of its more endearing primitive traits." There was the briefest pause. "She also says," Torith continued, now with the particular careful expressionlessness of a translator delivering something he'd rather not be delivering, "that she thought humanity had progressed beyond using its less capable members for tasks requiring no cognitive input." That last one landed like a dropped weight. The man with the mop looked at Torith for a moment, then looked past him at the Empress. He said nothing. The Empress said something else, in that same carrying, musical Werk cadence. Her attendants made a sound I can only describe as appreciative, the social signal of an audience acknowledging a good performance. Torith's jaw tightened. "She says that she hopes your kind finds its cleaning work fulfilling. She says it is good that every creature has its place, even the—" He stopped. "Even the what?" the man said. His voice had not changed, not in tone, not in volume, but something in it had shifted, the way a river shifts when the current beneath the surface changes direction. Torith looked genuinely uncomfortable, even the lower functioning varieties. "I want to describe what happened next in the atrium. Because on the surface, what happened next was nothing." The man with the mop stood there for a moment. He was looking at the Empress now, not at Torith. A long, level, completely unreadable look. The Empress met it with her gold eyes and the expression of someone who has never in their life had to wonder whether they were going to be challenged. Then the man reached down and wrung the mop out in the bucket, one smooth, practiced motion. He straightened up, put the mop handle over his shoulder. And this is the detail I keep coming back to, because it was so deliberately human, so mundane, and he turned back to the section of floor he'd been working on. And went back to mopping. The Empress watched him for 3 full seconds. Then she said something that made 2 of her guards exchange a brief look. I'm not certain, but I think," she said something like, "doesn't it know it should bow?" Her laughter and the attendants' laughter filled the atrium. I stood near my wall, holding my document case, and felt something uncomfortable moving through my chest that I couldn't quite name yet. The group moved on eventually, back through the corridor toward the Werk wing, the soft percussion of boots fading, the Werk language thinning out into silence. The man with the mop kept working. I stayed where I was for another few seconds before I realized I was staring, and that he knew I was staring, because he had already looked at me once, same brief, flat assessment, and classified me as non-threatening and returned to his task. I made myself move toward the secondary lift bank. And then I stopped. I'm not sure what made me stop. Maybe it was the thing I'd felt in my chest that I still hadn't named. Maybe it was just that something about the whole scene had snagged in me like a hook, and I couldn't quite pull free of it. I cleared my throat. He looked up. "I'm sorry," I said. "About what she—" I gestured vaguely at the corridor the Empress had disappeared into. "That was." "Forget it," he said. Not unkindly, just final. The way someone says forget it when they mean it is already forgotten. This is not where I am putting my energy. I nodded, started to turn away. "You work here," he said. I looked back, courier, 9th floor. He nodded once, late night. "Document backlog." A brief almost expression, not quite a smile, but something in that vicinity. "I know about backlogs." He went back to mopping. I went to the lift. And in the lift, going up to 37 with my document case on my lap, I sat with that unnamed thing in my chest and eventually recognized it. It was the feeling you get when you see someone be diminished in public, and they don't break, when the diminishment just rolls off them like water, and you can't tell if that means they're incredibly strong or if it means the damage is already so deep that the new wound can't find purchase. Both of those are sad in different ways. I thought about him for a few minutes. Then the documents needed signing, and then I needed to get home, and the world kept moving the way it always does. His name, I found out later, much later, after everything, was Marcus Vale. Not Vale like the Empress, it's a common enough syllable, coincidence. His full record, when I eventually saw it in the aftermath, was 41 pages long and classified at a level that meant the version I saw was redacted in 17 places, which is to say that what I saw was the version they decided I could handle. What the redacted version still told me was this. Marcus Vale had been born in a place called Holt Station, in the asteroid belt of what was then a contested mining territory on the edge of human-controlled space. Not Earth, not one of the core colonies. The edge. The kind of place where infrastructure arrived late and laws arrived later, and people developed a particular relationship with difficulty. He had enlisted in the Colonial Defense Forces at 17, not the main CDF, but the CDR, the Reserve Auxiliary, which at the time was a polite name for the irregular forces that operated in territories the main military hadn't fully mapped yet. The kind of units that didn't receive standard equipment, standard support, or standard anything, but were expected to produce standard results. He had served for 11 years. What happened in those 11 years was what the redactions were for. I know some of it from what came out later in the aftermath inquiry, not all of it. Nobody knows all of it except Marcus himself and possibly a handful of people who aren't talking. Here is what I know. The CDR Reserve Auxiliary units that operated in the contested border territories in the 2340s and 2350s were not fighting the same war that the history transmissions describe. The official history talks about patrol operations and diplomatic security and supply route protection. The actual history, the one that lives in 41-page classified files and the bodies of men like Marcus Vale, was something else. There were 11 border systems in that period that the Galactic Compact had formally marked as disputed under negotiation. What that phrase meant, in practical terms, was that the Compact's laws didn't apply there yet. Its treaties had no enforcement mechanism there, and the various non-human interests with territorial ambitions in those systems knew it. What that meant for the humans who lived in those systems was something I don't think I have the right words for. Marcus Vale's unit, 7 soldiers, operating out of a converted cargo hauler called the Red Line, with equipment held together by repair work and stubbornness, spent 4 years in 3 of those 11 systems. The unit's official designation was CDR-17 Special Operations Reserve. Their unofficial designation, the one that eventually reached other soldiers through the informal network of stories that soldiers used to understand their world, was something in a language I don't speak, given by the populations of those systems after the 3rd year. Toreth told me later what it translated to. The ones who do not fall. I didn't know any of this the night I met Marcus Vale. I just knew a man with a mop who hadn't flinched. What I know now, looking back, is that the specific combination of things that happened that night, the hour, the building, the Empress, the words she used, and the particular frequency of contempt she deployed them with formed something. Like a key, almost, like the specific arrangement of tumblers that opens a specific lock. And what was behind that lock had been sleeping for a long time. I had been home for maybe 3 hours when my comm buzzed. Not my personal comm, the Bureau emergency channel, which I carried because of the classified document runs. It doesn't activate for minor incidents. It activates for building-level events that require all current access personnel to either evacuate or report. All personnel with active Spire access, security event level 4. This is not a drill. Central atrium, floors 36 through 40. Evacuate if below 36 or above 40. Hold in place if between. Await further instruction. I sat up in bed and looked at the comm and felt the unnamed thing from earlier come back, this time with company. Level 4 meant shots fired or structural compromise or a credible threat to diplomatic personnel. Level 4 meant the Compact's own rapid response forces would be activating. Level 4 was the kind of thing that showed up on news transmissions. I dressed faster than I'd undressed and went back to the Spire. The street outside was already chaos adjacent. Not full chaos, the kind of organized, early-stage chaos that trained security people create when they're trying to prevent actual chaos. Barriers at 100-meter perimeter, emergency vehicles forming a wide ring, lights going, building in lockdown. A crowd of onlookers on the far side of the barriers, the particular silence of a group that's frightened and therefore very still. I showed my bureau identification to the external security checkpoint and was directed to the emergency assembly point on the east side, where a cluster of Spire workers was standing with the slightly undone look of people who'd been very recently woken up. I found Torith there. He was in the same diplomatic aid clothes from earlier, which told me he'd never gone home. He looked like he'd aged 3 years since the atrium. "What happened?" I asked. He looked at me and then looked away toward the building. His jaw was working. "Torith, the Verk guards," he said quietly. 3 of them, they went back." "Went back where?" "To the atrium." He stopped. He stopped again. "They said he disrespected her, the janitor. They said the way he didn't respond when she was speaking. They said it was an insult to the sovereignty's dignity, that they needed to," he pressed his lips together, "that they needed to make it clear." I stared at him. "3 of them," I said. "They brought their restraint poles." He said it flat, the way you say things when you can't afford to feel them right now. It was going to be public. They were going to make an example for her. Something cold settled in my stomach. "Torith," I said carefully, "what happened to the 3 guards?" He looked at me. "That's why it's a level 4, he said. "What I have to tell you next comes from multiple sources. The building's security footage, which was eventually released as part of the aftermath inquiry. Testimony from 2 facilities workers who were on the 38th floor at the time. Testimony from Torith himself, who was present for approximately 40 seconds of it before his security training correctly told him to remove himself from the area. And from Marcus Vale, in a brief, flat, almost bored account, he gave to the inquiry panel that the panel members seemed to find both insufficient and more than they'd bargained for at the same time. I've put it together as best I can. It was approximately 1:30 hours. Marcus was finishing his shift. The atrium floor was done. He'd moved to the eastern service corridor on 38, working his way toward the end of the building. The building was genuinely quiet now. Even the Verk delegation wing was dark by this point. The 3 guards came down the service corridor behind him. They hadn't bothered with stealth. Why would they? He was a janitor, a human janitor, in a building full of their Empress's retinue. What was he going to do? They called out to him in Verk. He turned around. Security footage shows him standing there in the corridor with his mop cart looking at them. 1 moment, 2 moments. That same quality of flat attention. The lead guard said something. Extended the restraint pole. A Verk restraint pole is roughly 1.5 meters long, capable of delivering a charge that incapacitates most known species, paired with a physical striking head for initial compliance. Marcus looked at the pole, looked at the guard, put the mop handle against the wall. And that single, specific motion is the moment I keep returning to, because in that moment, the security footage shows something change in him. Not dramatically, not with violence or sound or any of the cinematic signals we use to mark transformation. His posture shifted. It was subtle. If you weren't watching carefully, you'd miss it. His shoulders dropped about 1 centimeter. His weight settled differently into his stance, forward, slightly, center of gravity lowering. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, went still in a specific way that hands only go still when they're about to move very quickly. His face didn't change. That's the thing that the 2 facilities workers, watching from a service room doorway 20 meters down the corridor, described afterward when they tried to explain what made them so frightened before anything even happened. His face didn't change. That's what got me. He just went somewhere else behind his eyes. The lead guard moved first. He swung the restraint pole in a practiced arc. High, designed to catch someone across the shoulder or upper chest. The kind of blow you make when you're not trying to seriously injure someone and don't need to. Marcus wasn't where the blow landed. I'm going to write that again because the security footage is clear about it, and I want to make sure I'm being accurate. Marcus wasn't where the blow landed. He moved not away into, a step inside the arc that brought him close enough to the guard that the restraint pole was behind him and useless. And what happened next took approximately 1.5 seconds and left the lead guard on the floor. The footage doesn't show exactly what he did. The angle is wrong, the corridor lighting leaves shadows. What it shows is 1.5 seconds, guard standing, guard not standing. The second guard reacted immediately. They were trained soldiers, they weren't slow. I want to be clear about that. The Verk are a warrior species with 4 centuries of military development. These were not ordinary guards, they were the Empress's personal protection detail, selected from the sovereignty's best. The second guard activated his pole and came in at a different angle. And here is where the accounts start to diverge, because Toreth had arrived at the far end of the corridor by this point. And what he saw, what he described to the inquiry panel with the very specific precision of someone choosing their words with extreme care, was not something he could fully account for in terms of technique or timing. He was, Toreth said, already somewhere else. Every time they committed to a direction, he was already past it. It wasn't reaction. It was like he knew where they were going before they did. And then he was inside their commitment and they couldn't redirect, and Toreth had stopped there for a moment. He didn't waste anything, Toreth said. That's the thing. Not a single movement that wasn't going somewhere specific. No anger, no adrenaline waste, no. The inquiry panel had asked him to describe the damage. Toreth had looked at the table. Second guard, wrist, shoulder, something in the leg below the knee. Third guard, 2 ribs, I think, possibly 3, something to the elbow joint. He'd paused. They were alive. He kept them alive. I'm fairly sure he could have, but he kept them alive. Deliberately. The 2 facilities workers at the end of the corridor described a different part of it. They said that after the third guard was down, Marcus stood in the corridor for approximately 20 seconds. Not moving, just standing. And they said, and this is the part that appeared in 3 separate accounts, and was therefore probably true, that he made a sound. Not a war cry. Not a scream or a roar, not anything dramatic. A low, even exhale, like someone surfacing from deep water, like something very large releasing pressure through a very small valve. One of them said, "It made my bones hurt. I don't know how else to say it. The sound he made was in my bones." And then it stopped. And Marcus looked down the corridor, looked at the 2 workers in the doorway, looked at Toreth, and said in a completely ordinary voice, as if he was explaining a small logistical problem, "You should probably call someone." There's another piece of the story that the official footage doesn't capture, because it happened in the secure corridor outside the Verk wing. This one comes from a single source, a Verk attendant, an interior one who was awake due to the activity and who watched through a cracked door. Her testimony was included in the compact side inquiry and has never been publicly released, but a summary version was shared with the Bureau during the diplomatic fallout, and I read it. She said the Empress was awake, had been awake, was standing in the doorway of her suite when news of the guards reached her. And the attendant said, Empress Sareth Kine stood there for a long moment, receiving the report from her senior advisor. And the expression on her face, the attendant struggled to describe it, because the Verk don't have a direct linguistic equivalent for the human concept of recalibration. But she used a Verk word that the translator rendered approximately as the moment when you reach for a stone and find it is instead a mountain. The Empress stood there in the doorway of her suite with that expression on her face. And then she asked one question. Just one. And the translator rendered it as, "What is he?" The aftermath took weeks to untangle. The compact's response was predictably careful. The language of the official statement described the incident as a security misunderstanding resulting from cultural protocol differences, and used the word regrettable 6 times. The Verk sovereignty's formal response was notably brief, which in diplomatic terms means either that they were very angry or that they were recalibrating their position significantly, and the consensus in the Bureau was that it was the latter. 3 Verk guards with varying degrees of injury. No human casualties. An incident that began with contempt and ended with something that nobody in the building had vocabulary for yet. Marcus Vale was placed on administrative hold the following morning, pending the inquiry. He was given a small holding room on the 5th floor with a cot and a window and access to a meal service. I know this because I was the courier assigned to deliver the formal administrative hold notification to him, which meant I sat across a small table from him while he signed the receipt of notification. He read the document first, all of it, carefully, not rushing. Then he signed it and pushed it back. "Thank you," he said. "I should have just taken the document and left. That was my job. That was all I was there for." I said, "Are you okay?" He looked at me, that flat assessment again. Then something in it softened, barely, just at the edges, in the way that very controlled people sometimes let a very small amount of themselves show when they decide someone is worth the risk. "I've had worse administrative holds," he said. "That's not what I asked." A pause. "No," he said, "it's not." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the window. "They were going to make an example," he said. It wasn't a question or a complaint, just an observation stated in the same tone he'd probably used to describe the weather. In front of the cameras, for her. "I know," I said. "I've seen examples made before," he said. "In the border systems, I know what it looks like when somebody is being used to send a message." He was still looking at the window. "I'm old enough that I thought I was past caring, past being the thing that responds." "But," I said. He was quiet for another moment. "They came down that corridor like it was going to be easy," he said, "like there was nothing on the other end of it that needed accounting for." He turned from the window and looked at me. "I don't know what that does to a person, years of that. Hundreds of years of assuming that when you reach for a human being, there's nothing much there." "Something clicked," I said. "Something very old," he agreed. He picked up his cup of water and took a sip, set it down. "I hurt them," he said, not guilty, not satisfied, just honest with the particular honesty of someone doing accounting. "Not more than necessary, but I hurt them. 3 people who were told their whole lives that the reach was safe." "They came for you," I said. "They came for the janitor," he corrected gently. "There's a difference. They didn't know they were coming for me." I asked him before I left about his service, about the border systems and CDR-17 and the 11 years. He considered whether to answer for a long moment. Then he said, "You know what the hardest part of that work was?" "What?" "Coming back," he said. "Not the work. The work makes sense in its way. You have a problem, you solve it. There's a cost, you pay the cost, you move forward." He turned the water cup slowly in his hands. "But you come back to places like this, buildings, people in offices doing their normal things, and you're carrying all of it and nobody can see it, and you spend years trying to figure out how to put it somewhere it fits." "Did you find somewhere?" He almost smiled, a fraction of something. "Mopping floors," he said. "Strangely, yes." I left him there with his window and his water, and his 41 classified pages. The inquiry took 3 weeks. Marcus Vale was ultimately cleared on grounds of self-defense and defense of person, given that the guards had initiated physical contact. The Compact's legal office spent considerable time on the phrasing of the determination. Choosing language that acknowledged the force used was proportional given the threat level and the documented defensive context, which was a careful way of saying. We looked at the footage, and this man incapacitated 3 Verk Sovereignty elite guards in approximately 40 seconds, and he did it with his hands, and we would very much like to not have to explain that publicly. The Verk Sovereignty formally withdrew 3.5 days early from their diplomatic engagement, citing scheduling requirements. Empress Ridiculed departed the spire without further public comment. Toreth told me months later that he'd heard from a colleague in the Compact's diplomatic corps that the Sovereignty had quietly requested the full service record, the unredacted version, of Marcus Vale. "What did the Compact say?" I asked. "They said it was classified," Toreth said, "but they said it very respectfully." He paused. "I heard she read the summary version anyway," he said. "The parts that were cleared for release, and when she finished, she apparently sat with it for a while. And said the word the attendant used. The mountain one," he looked somewhere over my shoulder. "I don't think it translated as an insult the second time she used it." Marcus Vale returned to work 12 days after the incident, once the administrative hold was lifted and the inquiry closed. He went back to the same floor, the 38th, the same corridor, the same bucket, the same mop. I know this because I still work 9th floor courier, and I still have late document nights sometimes, and I still have to use the secondary lift bank on 38 occasionally. The first time I saw him again after everything, he was mopping the far end of the atrium, the exact same arc and rhythm as before. Like the interruption had simply been that, an interruption, filed and done with, and now back to the actual work. I stopped. He looked up. That flat assessment, then the fraction of a smile. "Document backlog," he said. "Always," I said. He nodded once and went back to his work. I stood there for a second longer, watching him, thinking about what he'd said about putting things somewhere they fit. The atrium was very quiet. The star system panels were rotating slowly through their display, Proxima cluster, the outer belt systems, the 17 systems of the Verk sovereignty, glowing softly in the low evening light. Marcus Vale moved his mop in its long, even, exact arcs across the floor. I thought about 400 years of a species, assuming that the reach was safe. I thought about 11 years, and a converted cargo hauler called the Red Line and 7 soldiers, and the words that don't translate. I thought about what it is to be diminished so completely, so routinely, so absolutely without malice, which is almost worse, that the diminishment forgets to be afraid of what it's diminishing. And I thought about what it is when what's been diminished remembers, in a service corridor at 1:30 hours, with a very small and very specific key, exactly what it is. There is a concept in some of the older human military traditions, the ones that predate the colonial expansion that go back to the continental wars of old Earth, that the Bureau's historians sometimes discuss in academic contexts. The idea of the Berserker, the fighter who reaches under specific and extreme conditions a state of total commitment. Not rage, that's a misunderstanding, not abandon or recklessness. Totality, the state of having fully and without reservation become the thing you are in this moment, for this purpose, with no reservation held back. Most people live their whole lives with reservations. Most people hold back some portion of themselves in every situation, for social reasons, for safety reasons, out of habit, out of the ordinary human calculation that full commitment is dangerous and costly and usually unnecessary. Berserkers in the old sense, the real sense, not the dramatic popular version, were people in whom that holding back had, through specific kinds of experience and specific kinds of cost, been entirely used up. Not damaged. Not broken, used, the way a tool is used, the way the thing a tool does becomes perfectly natural to it. Marcus Vale had not been triggered or activated or awakened, not in any mystical sense. He had simply, for the first time in a long time, in a service corridor at 1:30 hours, with 3 people coming toward him who didn't know what they were coming toward, stopped holding back. And then stopped. Because that's the other thing about what he was. He stopped. He made a sound like surfacing from deep water, and he stopped, and he told Torith to call someone. I hurt them, not more than necessary. That's not a berserker in the dramatic sense. That's something harder to describe and less cinematic, and I think much more true to what that kind of human actually is. Not a weapon. Not a monster. Something that was called into being by a specific set of circumstances, did what it was, and then put itself back. Like a man putting the mop handle against the wall. I have thought about what happened in that building more times than I can count, in the years since. I have thought about the Empress and her gold eyes, and the word she used when she reached and found a mountain. I have thought about Torith's face in the atrium, going pale with the translated words. I have thought about the 3 guards on the corridor floor alive, which I think was a choice, and what kind of person makes that specific choice in that specific moment. And I think about Marcus Vale, moving his mop in long, even arcs across the 38th floor atrium of the Sovereignty Spire, under the gentle rotation of star system displays, in the particular quiet of late evening. The last berserker, maybe, or just a man who knew which things fit where and had found his place. Either way, some things should remember what they are. Not for threat, not for pride. Just so that the reach, the long, confident, contemptuous reach across centuries of assumption, lands on something it didn't account for. Lands on a mountain when it expected a stone.